Dee Caffari became the first woman to sail around the world solo, non-stop, in both directions. And she told me about the beauty and the fear one experiences as a yachtswoman.
You don't want to think of it as dice with death, but every time an alarm sounds, every time you close your eyes on a boat and something happens, it is your life in your own hands. People say, oh, how do you wake up? I said, if it was your life in the balance, you would wake up and do something about it too. So, and it's that balance of keeping safe and pushing hard because it's a competitive environment, and keeping that balance is the thing that makes it exciting. And that's why people like the extreme offshore round the world races, because if you push too far, it shows and something happens. If you're too careful, you get left behind.
Give me an example of a moment on this trip where you thought, oh, God, I've forgotten what this is like. This is really rubbish.
Well, it's always really hard. The Barcelona race in particular starts from Spain and you leave the Mediterranean, which is tough, but it's generally nice conditions, sunny. You go down the Atlantic and it's the tropics and it's in your shorts and you're complaining it's too hot. And you always forget just how sudden the change is when you get into the Southern Ocean. And it's that realisation that these are big winds and big waves, and actually it's remote and hostile down there and there's no one there to rescue you. They're like 2 weeks away unless you rely on a fellow competitor, and it really brings it home. And I don't think you ever are prepared enough for that first storm when it hits you. It's always a bit of a surprise. You forget just how bitterly cold it is when your fingers are so cold they want to drop off, and when the boat's accelerating and you're thinking, actually, this is quite scary. And then you remember what it's like and you think, no, I remember this, it's okay, and we can do this.
So how do you conquer fear? If you say if there are moments when you do feel fear.
The reason I do the sport, the reason I sail offshore is I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy pitting my wits against nature. And it's one of those strange things where it's nature that you can't control. And the sea and the wind really does tell you who's boss. Every time you think you've got everything under control, they throw a curveball at you. And I think that forever challenging, and no 2 days are ever the same when you're at sea. Every day's a school day, they say, and literally the wind and the waves always give you slightly different conditions, and you're trying to make your boat go as fast as you can. And as you grow in confidence, you get more competitive. And when you see yourself doing well, that's what drives you on. You want to keep going down there and doing it again so you get better at it.
You are taking risks, of course. I mean, you're trying to control the risks as much as you can. But have there been moments when you've thought, actually, this could be really serious, actually? I could have a serious accident here and there is nobody out here to get me.
It is one of those things. It's always in the back of your mind, and you do everything within your power to control the perceived risks and try to prepare for them. So you do a lot of things where you're the jack of all trades but never quite the master of one, and you're meant to know how to repair everything and fix everything. But it's always a challenge because it's only you, and you think, God, did I remember what I was meant to do? And I did have, actually, on the Vendée Globe, when I was down there on my own, as we approached Cape Horn, there was a really severe weather warning, a massive storm coming, just at the time we were meeting that notorious point. And it was actually the race direction that made the decision to stop the 3 boats that were there, myself and 2 others, from racing, and they told us to wait for the weather, and that's never happened before. And fortunate that they did. It was a huge storm and we wouldn't have survived it. But then we all just carried on racing once the worst of the weather had gone. And I think it's because you know the risk, you think of all the what-ifs that could happen to your boat, and you think of how you're going to deal with them. And we do try and cover as many things as possible, but ultimately nature's going to win at the end of the day.
Do you contemplate that before you go on a circumnavigation or on a big trip? Do you think, this could be my last trip potentially? I mean, do you look at the people you love, you know, your boyfriend, your dog, your family, and think, do you know, I might not see you again?
It's really hard. Goodbyes are really hard anyway. You're really fueled with adrenaline because you've got a mission, you've got a race to go and do. So you're thinking of other things actually at the time. But you know it's actually more difficult for the people you leave behind. I know what I'm doing, I know how I'm feeling, and I know what I'm facing. They're trying to guess, and they're not always getting it at the same time as I am. And they're trying to interpret what's going on. And it is hard for them. And I'm very aware of that. But you know, you have to have life insurance, you have to have boat insurance before you're allowed to leave the dock. And that's not easy when you're a solo sailor racing around the world to get.
It must be a nightmare.
Exactly, that's a large part of the budget for sure. And they insist that you write a will before you leave. And these are all the things that you just don't want to acknowledge could happen, but you have to have them in place. And there's also the discussion as a team for the crisis communications of if something happened, in the event of something happening. So you've got all your bases covered before you leave. And it's probably one of the hardest conversations we have. And I have to say in what order I want people contacted and who should be told first. And you just think, I don't want to talk about this, but you know you have to cover it. And it's all those things that if you address it, you'll never have to use it, hopefully.
Do you feel as a woman that you're judged differently from male competitors? Do people look at the risks that you take and view it in a different way, say, how can you do this as a woman, or do they feel more uncomfortable that you put yourself in harm's way?
There's obviously quite often a very big discrepancy between the males of the sport and the females of the sport. And I think sailing's one of those few sports where we compete on an even platform. But what's interesting is when the conversation comes and you see the footage of the skippers saying goodbye to their little children and sailing off around the world, and people's opinion of that's okay because the child's staying with mum, but actually they don't have the same opinion, or it's not as easy for them to have the same opinion when they see mum saying goodbye to the little child and leaving the child with dad as they sail off around the world. And that's a really strange perception that people have of how it should be.
Paint a picture for us of a moment where you are out there somewhere in the ocean and you think, this is the best place to be. The risks are outweighed by this moment.
It is incredible, and it's normally directly after a really hard patch where you want to cry, or it's just beating you down, the weather's horrendous, or something's broken and you've got to fix it. And almost by clicking your fingers, you suddenly have the boat sailing really well and you have an uninterrupted horizon with the most amazing sunset of all really deep colours. The dolphins are playing and you can't even take a picture to get that snapshot to allow other people to see how beautiful it is.
Well, that was the amazing Dee Caffari. She's just achieved such a lot in her chosen sport. I think she sums up so brilliantly there what makes it so fascinating and so special.